Today's sermon addresses the following of the UU7 principles. Principle 1. We affirm and promote the inherent worth and dignity of every person. Principle 2. We affirm and promote justice, equity, and compassion in human relations. Principle 5. We affirm and promote the right of conscience and the use of the democratic process within our congregations and in society at large. And Principle 6. We affirm and promote the goal of world community with peace, liberty, and justice for all. Today's sermon by Amanda Rice is called I Can't Breathe, 3 words that describe our era. Amanda Rice was raised in the San Francisco East Bay and moved to New Orleans after graduating from CSU Chico. She taught English and American Studies in New Orleans public schools for 5 years. She and her husband moved to Cambria in early 2001, where she worked with the Youth Center and HEART before getting involved with local government, first with the North Coast Advisory Council, 2006 to 2010, and then with the Cambria Community Services District, where she is nearing the end of her 2nd term. Her history of activism started in preschool. I like this part. Where she was the first girl to carry the cross to the weekly visit to the chapel. After having asked her teachers why only boys were chosen to carry the cross. Fairness, collaboration, community, and solidarity are concepts that continue to shape her thinking and involvement in public life. Welcome, Amanda.
Good morning. Make sure, can you hear me? Good. Good morning, everybody. I was inspired by a podcast that I listen to frequently called The Best of a Left, which is a compilation of other podcasts and shows that are left-leaning, obviously. He recently did an episode called I Can't Breathe. I want to state at the start of this, there are a lot of marginalized communities that are really struggling right now, and this is not meant to minimize those struggles at all. I am going to be focusing on a lot of social issues, but I also want to focus on race. And one of the reasons I want to do that is because I keep hearing from every podcast I've been listening to for years, every Black person keeps saying, we're tired of explaining it to you white people. You guys start educating each other instead of asking us all the time what's happening. So that was the impetus for me making this presentation. This is one of my favorite bumper stickers I've ever seen. It's also my favorite line of the salute to the flag, liberty and justice for all. Unfortunately, there's an asterisk on that. So much is happening, so many outrages and assaults on our psyche that it is hard to think clearly and carefully and critically. In the face of some of the worst numbers for COVID-19 victims in the world, essential workers are striking for safer workplaces. More people than ever are involuntarily unemployed. Large groups of people are out demonstrating to end police brutality. Overall, it seems like a huge number of people are just fed up. This definition from the Urban Dictionary, I embellished and added the metaphorical reality that we're having trouble breathing. We need more room to breathe. We need some help supporting, paying for health care, paying for our bills if we're unemployed, and there's a metaphorical epidemic of exhaustion and burnout. So in this situation, what do the leaders of the richest country in the world do to respond? In this time of deep economic insecurity and uncertainty, for most people, those at the top are continuing their vicious looting of our culture and natural wealth. The current economic precarity is intentional. The recently passed CARES Act and other pandemic legislation made sure large banks and corporations were financially stable. Citizens of other hard-hit countries were locked down and provided the support they needed to cover their expenses without having to put themselves at risk of spreading the virus more widely. When Congress funded Wall Street to the tune of $5 trillion with a T, dollars, without accountability, they were arguing that they should have means testing for the single $1,200 check that was sent out. I don't know about you, but I find that rather appalling. So those who applied and qualified for unemployment insurance often had to wait months before they got any relief, and some are still waiting. Essential workers are being treated as disposable by the employers. Most of them cannot afford to stay home, even though they're afraid they'll get sick. And speaking of sick, since most people's health insurance is tied to their work, that means a heck of a lot of people lost their health insurance because they no longer have a job. When you toss in those who are emboldened by Trump's behavior to attack people when they are confronted about not wearing a mask, there's a lot out there to fear. I was afraid to go out in the early parts of the first reopening because I was wearing a mask and people without masks would attack me for wearing one. And that didn't feel comfortable, but it also felt like maybe that's the way that a lot of Black people feel a lot of the time. They're not sure how people are going to react to them just being there and existing. And I can take my mask off. In all of this happening, the death of George Floyd became a centerpiece example of what police brutality is. And I don't know how many of you know this, but his death was actually COVID related. The person at the shop called the police because he was trying to pass a fake $20 bill, a 20, not 100, a 20. Because he was out of work, because what he does is he works the door at a bar and he delivers food and was an Uber driver. And so he made a $20 bill, or he got a fake 20. We don't even know if the 20 was something that he concocted or it was passed to him. That's the whole reason why the cop was there and put his foot on his neck for as long as he did. So I just find that so frustrating. Yeah, I'm reading a script because there's a lot of things about this that very much upset me, and it is such an abomination how many things are happening right now that are just beyond the pale. So does America respect basic human rights or personal dignity of its people? We used to be the yardstick that other countries would measure themselves by. Everybody wanted to be like us. Maybe that's what the president's saying when thinking of when he says he wants to make America great again, when everybody wanted to be us. It is great for some people. A lot of other people are feeling insecure and uncertain about the future. And that is just not a good way to have a healthy community or a healthy nation. So one of my favorite quotations is the greatest enemy of knowledge isn't ignorance, it's actually the illusion of knowledge. If you think you know something, you're not going to go and try and learn it. So the election of the 45th president and the COVID crisis and George Floyd have laid bare the systemic inequities in the system in this country that we have continued to remodel, but it's still not working for us. In the richest country in the world, our systems continue to fail to provide the basic human rights of the people living in it. Many white Americans now are recognizing now, finally, what Black and brown and other Americans have known for decades, poor Americans have known for decades. The system isn't broken. It was made to work this way. So whenever I look at something that maybe is happening, I like to see how it's done elsewhere. And the 25th article of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights from the UN, which was ratified in 1948, talks to everyone has a right to a standard of living that's adequate. I don't need to read this to you, but it speaks to everything that we are not getting as Americans from our government, which I don't need a handout, but it sure would be nice to get a little bit of support when there's so much to go around for corporations and Wall Street. So there's three basic categories that I want to just kind of gloss over, and we're going to get into a little bit more on what defunding the police means and some steps that you can take as an individual and steps that need to be taken on a larger systemic basis. I know it sounds like a 9-week course, but I'm going to run through it quickly. So economic inequality and insecurity, disparity of treatment under the law, and lack of access to reliable information, which is required for democracy. So here's what we should have. We should have fair pay for work. We should have a reliable social safety net. We should have equal access to housing, education, and healthcare. We should have good policing. We should have courts and incarceration that are fair. And we have to have a fair immigration system. And then on the reliable information, media consolidation has limited voices and views, and the once reliable sources have been undermined. Instead, what we have is workers that create wealth for owners, but wages have not kept up with the cost of living, and profits are sky high for the owners. Programs for unemployment, Social Security, and other social programs have had their funding cut. And when you are in poverty, you lose your home, you have fewer jobs available, and you have a choice between bankruptcy or basically poor general health if you don't have health care. And as somebody who has not had a job where I get my health care through work, it's such a hard thing. You have to have such a low level of income to qualify to get help for those payments. It's an absurd situation that we haven't been offered Medicare for all yet. So policing, and there's two separate systems based on race and class. We have awful racist policies relating to separating families and refusing political refugees. If you weren't aware, just 20 years ago, there were 90 different owners of news media. Today, there's 6. It might be branded different, but you're getting it from the same source. And 45 has continuously undermined real facts and spread the trope of fake news. And now there actually is fake news. The good news is Black Americans have been raising their voices and saying stuff for centuries. And starting with the beating of Rodney King and then moving forward all the way through the development of Black Lives Matter, there is a lot more resources online for people who want to organize, who want to know how to organize. When I started at NCAC in 2006 and tried to find sources online that would help me understand group dynamics and what are the stages of an organization so that you can fix issues with an organization, that none of that stuff was out there. The number of resources out there now is at a level of quality that I think there's instruction books for how you can put an organization together and successfully achieve goals with it. And that's one of the good things that has come out of all of this um, unfair and in unequal treatment. I just want to quickly say the movement to defund the police. There's a big debate about whether that's a good slogan or not. I personally think it's a good slogan because immediately people get, what do you mean defund the police? Well, then you've started a conversation. This illustration is pretty clear to me and is a good way to understand what they actually mean. They mean we fund education so little. The city of New York has 5,000 officers in schools, which is more than twice as many counselors of all sorts that they have in their schools. That's kind of a bad set of priorities if you're spending all of your money, if you're spending all the tax money to fund the police, to cover everything, that huge burden. Defunding the police means taking those resources and putting them where they make more sense. You don't need somebody with a gun to show up at every single time you have a situation where the cops should come. We're going to look at the lower illustration in more detail in a minute. So crime has gone down in the last 20 years, and nobody really believes that it's because we're putting people in jail. Police don't really solve crimes as a major part of their job, and we must dispel the myth that we have a working system that is keeping us safe, because that's not the situation. We should be having a discussion around, what do we want our police to do? What do we consider important as priorities for public safety? And the reason defunding the police is so important is that the problems are systemic, and there's lots of them. And I'm not even going to go through every single one. If you're interested in the systemic problems with our current policing systems in the United States, please, I have got resources, and I urge you to inform yourself, educate yourself, because that's how we can best be allies and accomplices to those who are really doing the hard work. And one of the things that I really want to point out here is on this last bullet. So I have mixed feelings about police unions. One, I support unions. They should be strong. Police unions are some of the strongest unions in the entire country. They get whatever they want, essentially. More people should be in unions like the police have, so that more people can demand actual things that they need, like a living wage. But there's a catch-22 here, because the people who make the decisions about how much funding police get, the elected officials, which I've been one for 7 years, nobody wants to say, no, don't fund the police. No, fire department doesn't need more money, because the public doesn't understand the nuance of the situation. The public just sees, oh, you're going to take money away from fire department, you can take money away from the police department, then what is going to happen? Except that what they're trying to do is set different priorities. But then all of a sudden you don't respect police officers, and they're very organized to attack politicians who don't give them what they want, and they have guns. And elected officials are human beings too. They want to be safe too, and they might not feel safe turning down the demands from the police department, because who knows what might happen. I mean, that police officer stood on that man's neck for almost 10 minutes. I certainly wouldn't want to vote against that police department getting what the resources that they want. So I just want to put that out there. That perspective is a new one for me, having been in this position as an elected official. So there are a lot of ways we can defund the police without and actually let them do the job that they should be doing, which is keeping the peace. And even that sometimes, when you come into, keeping control of discord. So I have some political cartoons, some illustrations that I just find helpful because they illustrate so clearly the concept. So even if you didn't own slaves, you're not an individual racist, you're living in a racist system, which means, and if you're not a person of color, you have benefited, at least indirectly, from those systems. And this next one is even more clear. So I'm going to read this one because I think it's important. How Bob's great-grandparents got into the USA. Our immigration laws should make it easier for the right kind of people to immigrate. Well, Bob's grandparents became homeowners, and in the background you can see the black couple being told they can't help them. And how Bob got his job is he knew somebody. Well, you can't get hired if you don't know somebody. And if it's segregated society, how are you going to meet anybody? Bob's parents became homeowners. Bob got through his teens. He gets off with a slap on the wrist, but the black person gets arrested for the same crimes. So you can't say that you've never benefited from racism in this country. It's easy to forget in Cambria because we have a very white population here. Some of them are tan. But we also have a large brown population here, and we have to be conscious that even though these things like lynchings don't happen here, they are happening in our culture. And we have to stop it. We're the ones who started it. It was created by our ancestors to keep our superiority because they were worried about losing what they have. So I put this here because I know that everybody's feeling a bit overwhelmed at this moment. And if you're not, please call me after the service and tell me how you're managing that. Because compassion fatigue is real. People get burned out for real. They're working so hard to do things, to try and fix what's broken and try and change what was built wrong. I'm just going to say, take time off social media. If you spend any time on Facebook or Twitter or anywhere else, pick a day when you don't go on it. Limit yourself on it. If you need to go on it every day, because that's where I get my news, I like to catch up with my friends, that's fine. Set yourself a timer so you don't get sucked into the arguments, because at the base of all of this, we have a lot of people that are trying to divide us on stupid things. If we're arguing with each other, we can't fight the real enemy. If you're neutral in situations of injustice, you have chosen the side of the oppressor. And I'm sorry, I don't want to be an oppressor. There's 3 kinds of racism. Individual. That's when people call names, tell racist jokes. It's an individual thing. The more important types of, and you can make a difference as an individual in your own behavior. In fact, that's all you really can do, is change your own behavior. But there's also institutional racism, which is Black people are not allowed in this school. We're not going to give mortgages to Black people. And then there's systemic. And the systemic is so all-encompassing. A lot of times people don't even recognize it. And perpetuating the oppressive policies against people of color doesn't do anybody any good, because in the same way that if you don't educate women, you are negating 50% of your population and all of the talent thereby. Same thing when you're talking about people of color. This list is things you can say just to have right on the top of your head. So if somebody says something racist to you, you don't just stand there mute, you push back. In our own church, I had somebody say something very racist to me, and I was so shocked. I did not have anything that I could say, which was bad because I wasn't able to push back. Hold on, I need to process what you just said. Is it a really good thing to say? Somebody tells you a racist joke? Sometimes it's hard not to have that smile, but still you have to push back and say, that's not funny. That is not funny. And these are all things, if we go back just to the marriage rights, these are things that gay and lesbian, the whole LGBT community has trained us all to start saying in situations where homophobia raises its ugly head. We need to be doing the same with racism. If we're going to do anything about institutions, we have to work together. And this is one of my very favorite. I think of this often when I'm working with other politicians that I don't necessarily agree with, because we are the people standing on and keeping that person with the lectern at the edge. You get more than one or two people jumping off and you are going to see that person go down. This is how you change the world. I'm just going to leave this up for a moment so you can look at it, because it is about approaching with love, not trying to connect or shame people, not trying to denigrate other people because they don't think what you think is right. You have to approach it with love. Second favorite quote. When faced with the choice between changing one's mind and proving there's no need to do so, almost everyone gets busy on the proof. It's okay to say you're wrong. That's how you learn. What we must do is not going to be easy. We have to challenge white privilege and systemic racism wherever we see it. We have to push back on efforts to further divide us. You have to take it on yourself to educate yourself, learn more about how other Americans experience this country from those Americans and not secondhand. And there are lots of ways to do that, with reading, with podcasts, with video, with movies. You can help build coalitions across different class, race, age, and abilities. And I urge you, when I was 16, I first heard that phrase, question authority. Then I learned later on, you have to definitely pay attention to the motivations of leaders when their actions don't improve the current situation for everybody. These are some of the recommendations on podcasts, and I've already talked with Randy. I will have these for the newsletter on Tuesday. And I'm going to put these links because, as I said, there's a lot more resources available for people who want to organize, including Showing Up for Racial Justice, which is what our which is what the Showing Up for Justice group here is basing a lot of their work on. Showing Up for Racial Justice is about whites, helping whites get racial justice organizing going. if you open your chat window, I will put that up, and that's the end of my presentation. Thank you for your, I know that went so long. I'm sorry to go so long. I appreciate you all listening.
Thank you, Amanda. That was very empowering. Thank you very much.